Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to cover more about the clandestine services military intelligence history of the city by the bay known as San Francisco or St. Francis Assisi. And you should know that before there was a city of San Francisco, of course, there was a Spanish Franciscan monk infiltration of Alta California. That's what it was called before it was California. It was part of Mexico. It was part of the Spanish Empire, and California today has 21, count them, 21 mission systems that were initially established with Father Junipero Serra. That I grew up in parochial school, indoctrinated as believing that he was some kind of coming of Jesus. Turns out he was a military spook who was a military-controlled operative that used applied linguistics and magic tricks to gain control of the native people of California. Do you know if you were baptized into the Roman Catholic Church that you were then basically conscripted into slave labor onto the mission property? That's right. You couldn't just be a nomad and a migrant like Native American people were. They traveled wherever the food was, and they moved around. That all came to a screeching halt when Father Junipero Serra and his Spanish colonial orders were put into effect. And just to illustrate the point, before I get into the topics of the day, which are going to focus on Diane Feinstein, who's 89 years old and getting ready to retire or be retired from the United States Senate, as if there were such a body of noble people, nobility class in the United States Senate. Are you kidding me? All right. That's as ridiculous as Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House. Nancy Pelosi is to the House of Representatives what Dianne Feinstein is to the United States Senate. An embarrassment. All right. So before Nancy Pelosi was born, before her Jewish father was born, before her Jewish grandfather was born, we had the mission system, and effectively the very first mission of California is San Diego. That was July 16th, 1769. The mission San Diego was established. I've been to most of these missions, folks. Then the second mission was Mission San Luis Rey, which is in Oceanside. That's code for Camp Pendleton, United States Navy Marines. San Diego is code for Office of Navy Intelligence and United States Navy. And the third mission was Mission San Juan Capistrano. That's next door to San Clemente. That was home to Richard Nixon's White House on the west coast. The next mission was Mission San Gabriel, which is at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains near Pasadena, which is home to the Jet Propulsion Lab, Jack Parsons Lab, Caltech, Rocketdyne, Aerojet. It's near San Gabriel. Then we have Mission San Fernando. That is in Los Angeles. That's, of course, home to Jose Menendez and the porn industry. Then we had Mission San Ventura. That's in Ventura. Then we had Mission Santa Barbara in Santa Barbara next to Montecito, which is home for the spook people. Then we had Mission San Ynez, which is in Solvang, beautiful Solvang. And that is the rear entrance to the Ronald Reagan Ranch, Cielo de, what was that? Rancho del Cielo, Ranch of the Sky. You can get in through the back of Mission San Ynez. That's named. That's the name that Abigail Folger's mother took. Ynez Mejia, named after Santa Ynez. Then there's Mission La Pura Misma. That is in Lompoc. That's, of course, Vanderburg Air Force Base. Then there's Mission San Luis Obispo in San Luis Obispo. Got some prison systems over there. Men's Colony, where Charlie Watson was wrongly, incarcerated for a while. And I believe Doris Tate went to a parole hearing at that facility. She's CIA. And she did her crocodile tear act over at near the Mission San Luis Obispo. It's outside of town, so it's actually not near the mission. I think it's about 12 miles north. Anyway, then we had Mission San Miguel, which is one of the least visited missions in the system. It's in the town of San Miguel. And we have Mission San Antonio. It's the 12th mission. That's extremely remote. That is the least visited mission. Mission San Antonio, which I've been twice. And I'm here to tell you it's a military army base. It is in close proximity as the crow flies to both the Esalen Institute, which is on the ocean on Highway 1, Pacific Coast Highway, and it's also in close proximity to the William Randolph Hearst Castle. William Randolph Hearst used to ride his horses over to Mission San Antonio, stay overnight there, and then ride back the next day. That is no easy task, people, because it's very undulating. And when I say undulating, I mean 2,500 feet up and down. Then we had, I'm skipping over here, Soledad. We had Mission San Carlos in Carmel, which of course is home to our applied linguistics war center called Warfare Language Center. And it's operated by the Department of Defense. It's also home to the Navy's postgraduate school, and was home to the United States Army Fort Ord. It's also known as Spooksville, USA. Carmel Valley, and Monterey Peninsula is known as Spooksville. And of course, next door we have Santa Cruz, so of course we had to have a mission there. That's where Dr. Victor Ota and his family was murdered in Santa Cruz, Soquel. And so on and so forth, until eventually we came to San Francisco, which was established on June 11th, 1797. No, scratch that. October 9th, 1776. Right? So after the 4th of July, after the War of Independence was declared, Mission San Francisco de Assisi was established in San Francisco, October 9th, 1776. We only had 2 missions after that. We had Mission San Rafael and, of course, Mission San Francisco Solano, a.k.a. Sonoma, the Sonoma mission, which was established April 4th, 1824. So before the gold rush. And there were people out here surveying for silver and gold and copper and tin all during this. And that's not covered in the newspapers in New York or Chicago. All right, or Philadelphia. I guess what I'm trying to say is the vast majority of the 21 Franciscan established Spanish missions were all military outposts at the time that they were established. And to this day, in 2022, the vast majority of them are United States Navy, Army, Marine, Air Force bases. So nothing's changed, right? I guess that's my point. In 200 years, not a damn thing has changed. That takes me to our topic of the day, the city of San Francisco. And I'm going to start it off in 1850, because in 1850 was when the city of San Francisco had their first mayor appointed, and I gotta believe he was appointed, not elected. This is when the so-called gold rush was happening, and we had John White Geary appointed to be the mayor of San Francisco. He was from Pennsylvania, Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania. He took office as the mayor of San Francisco on May 1st, 1850. And he served a term of about a year. Through May 4th, 1851. He was a general in the United States Union Army, a general in the Union Army. He was a Freemason, of course. He was a lawyer and a politician. And His last accolade in his career really was the mayor of San Francisco. And he was also known as a governor of Kansas Territory, and he was the 16th governor of Pennsylvania. So in other words, he's plugged into the Illuminati, he's Freemason, and he's the fake mayor of San Francisco. All right, that's how we kicked off our San Francisco clandestine service history, is when we install a fake mayor who's really a military general. That's how I like to have my political fake leaders when they come from the military, overtly. Today, they sort of just dig them up from wherever, right? All right, so what else can I tell you? I want to focus in on some key luminaries operating for the CIA in San Francisco during the 1960s, and certainly since 1965 through 1969. But I'm going to hone in on 1969 because this is an important period. Joseph Alioto is the fake mayor of San Francisco at this time. He's a Roman Catholic indoctrinated person who was born in San Francisco. And he spent time in Washington, D.C. and was sent back to San Francisco, where he eventually became a fake mayor. And during this time, I think the most important person in San Francisco, in my personal opinion as a financial expert, was Abigail Folger's mother, Eunice Mejia, who went by the code name Pue. Everyone referred to Eunice Mejia, if you were friendly with her, as Pue. Abigail was referred to as Gibby. I like to call Abigail Abigail. Well, I like to call her Abby, but I've never met her, so I don't like the name Gibby. Abigail Folger was a debutante in San Francisco and had her coming out party at the St. Francis Hotel on Union Square. That was a few years earlier, before she went off to Harvard. She was attending Radcliffe at the time of her debutante party. She wore a canary yellow dress that she purchased in Paris, France. Eunice Mejia spoke fluent French and taught French. That's important, people. So did her daughter, Abigail Folger. She spoke fluent French also. That's important, especially if you're going to work with Polish Jews who are indoctrinated into British intelligence, CIA, because they speak French. The Polish Jews speak French. Eunice Mejia spoke French. Abigail Folger spoke French. Eunice Mejia is from El Salvador. I mean, her parents are from El Salvador. Her parents are ambassadors to El Salvador and have offices in the United States embassies in San Francisco for El Salvador. They lived in San Francisco, but they had to move because of the 1906 earthquake, and they moved to Piedmont, which is directly across the San Francisco Bay. About 8.5 miles to the east is this little paradise that was carved into the Oakland Hills known as Piedmont. That's where Robert McNamara was raised. That's where Leland Prussia was resided. It's where Eunice Mejia's parents lived. Eunice Mejia, I would like to say, spent a lot of time there, but she didn't. She was packed off to boarding schools, just like she did with her daughter, Abigail, who was packed off to the Santa Catalina School in Spooksville, Monterey, Carmel. But Eunice Mejia was 62 years old in 1969. It's in a very important year. Eunice Mejia was working very closely with all the important CI operatives who had offices at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which really wasn't about medical services. It was about anti-war, honeypot, counterintelligence operations, including LSD experiments, which would have included Midnight Climax, would have included MK Ultra experiments, and the main people in charge there were not the director. David Smith, University of California, San Francisco, pharmacologist, PhD. He's the director. He's the fake, phony director of the Free Medical Clinic. Because you know what? Eunice Mejia is in charge. She's 62 years old. She's the senior person. She's in private banking. She decides who gets paid when and who turns their expense reports in, and when she gets the progress reports, which are forwarded on to the clandestine services supervisor for Eunice Mejia, because even she has a boss. She's 62 years old. The next most senior person in this military clandestine CIA operations, plural, there are dozens of operations going on in San Francisco in 1969, and is Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary. That's right, I said Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, who attended West Point to become an officer. He was a cadet. He was in a leadership position, and then he left West Point under mysterious circumstances. We don't really know why he left, but he left. And then he ended up enlisting in the United States Army and gained the rank of sergeant, even though he was really scheduled to be a colonel. Anyway, he's CIA all the way, people. Timothy Leary, OSS, and then CIA. He was OSS in World War II, where he was a sergeant in the Army. He then went to University of California, Berkeley, to get his PhD in psychology. Then he is appointed as a department head of psilocybin at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he joins fellow PhD from UC Berkeley, but college professor from Stanford University in Palo Alto, Richard Albert, who they become lifetime pals and friends to their death, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Harvard, where they work on unsuspecting volunteers that some attended Harvard University and perhaps some didn't. A notable student at Harvard University was Ted Kaczynski. You may remember the name Ted Kaczynski. He became the Unabomber, and he typed up a manifesto, and the media portrayed him as a crazy whack job. He's CIA. He's a CIA whack job. The CIA paid for his 4 years at Harvard. He graduated from Harvard. Ted Kaczynski is a graduate of Harvard. He spent 3 of the years working with Timothy Leary and Richard Albert on mind control experiments off campus. Ted Kaczynski. So if he's a little wacky, don't look at me. That's the CIA's fault. That's MK Ultra. Don't look at me. That would have been 1958, 59, 60, 61. Abigail Folger rolls into town around 1960, 61. That's Ines Mejia's daughter, Pouet's daughter. Speaks fluent French. She goes to Radcliffe. Radcliffe merges with Harvard. It becomes Radcliffe Harvard. And then Abigail Folger goes on for another 18 months to get a master's degree in art history from Harvard University. I said Harvard University. Now, that's around 1963. Now, that's kind of a problem for Timothy Leary because something goes wrong with one of his test dummies, and the kid's parents became furious, and apparently they're plugged into the Illuminati, so they tell Harvard, we're going to go public unless you solve this problem. So Harvard University, on April 30th, 1963, the year that Jack Kennedy had his head blown off in Dallas, Texas, April 30th, Timothy Leary and Richard Albert of Stanford are effectively terminated. Now, they're terminated for a phony reason. They're terminated because they haven't been on time with their classes to the students of Harvard, that they've been tardy or AWOL during class time. Okay, that's poppycock. The reason that they were fired is because they screwed up the brain of one of their students. Anyway, no harm, no foul, because, of course, both Richard Albert of Stanford and Timothy Leary, formerly of Harvard, they get grants from Yale University, and I think Stanford kicks in some dough, and they move them to the Hudson Valley, to the Millbrook Institute, Millbrook, New York. It's a town, at the Alfred Hitchcock Mansion, 64-room palatial mansion in Millbrook, Hudson Valley. And there they continue on with whatever mind restructuring that they were doing in Cambridge, Massachusetts under Harvard. I don't think Harvard's supervising them. Obviously, nobody at Harvard is managing anything, right? It's a bank. It's a money laundering facility. The CIA is running the show at Harvard. The CIA is running the show at Stanford. The CIA is running the show at Noam Chomsky's, MIT, or wherever Noam is now. I think he went to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So that's a well-known CIA colony also. The systems of education in New Mexico and Arizona are not exactly what you call independently operated. And if Noam Chomsky shows up in your town, you know he comes with a whole owner's operation manual. All right. Don't get too close to the porcupine. He could stick you. All right, so Timothy Leary is 49 years old. Ines Mejia, the private banker in charge, she's 62. The next most senior person at Haight-Ashbury, which is in close proximity to St. Ignatius High School, University of San Francisco Jesuit College, and Lone Mountain Campus for Women, and St. Agnes Parochial School. Sharon Meadow, the Meadow named after a banker, set up for free concerts during the Summer of Love 1967. This is all walking distance. This is all within 5-6 blocks of each other. This is where Patty Hearst was kept for at least a year in 2 different homes in this neighborhood. This is where Kevin Collins disappeared for the rest of his life at age 10. He was a student at St. Agnes Elementary School. It's about 6 blocks from St. Ignatius High School, where Paul Pelosi attended. Anyway, this is near the Presidio Army Base, where Sharon Tate's father works as a colonel in United States Army Intelligence. He's the 3rd person in charge at Haight-Ashbury. He's number 3. He's 47 years old. He's a colonel in the United States Army. Timothy Leary was a sergeant in the Army. However, he has a PhD from UC Berkeley in psychology, and he's in charge of LSD experiments. So he outranks Paul Tate in the clandestine services. So Timothy Leary is above Sharon Tate's father. But above both of them is Abigail Folger's mother. She's above both of these knuckleheads. All right, who's number 4? Well, that's Louis Jolyon West, who goes on to become the department head at UCLA for psychology. But before that, he is conducting LSD and electroshock treatments, mind control experiments out of San Francisco, and I also believe San Anselmo and Mill Valley, Marin County, across the Golden Gate Bridge. Oh boy. So you have Paul Tate working with Louis Jolyon West, who also has, I believe, Air Force background, military background, and Timothy Leary, who has a West Point Army background. And those knuckleheads are working together. But Sharon Tate's father, I think, is more interested in taking an inventory of all the kids that are against the war in Vietnam. That's his primary job. Timothy Leary and Louis Jolyon West are interested in mind restructuring unwitting, innocent people. Okay, who's the number 5th person that's in the orbit of Haight-Ashbury but not technically assigned to it? George Moscone. George Moscone is 40 years old. He's around. He's there. And guess who else is there? Jim Jones. Yeah, Jim Jones, People's Temple. I know most people think about Jim Jones in the case of Jonestown, a CIA colony on Union Carbide property in French Guiana, 100 kilometers, 100 clicks up the river from Georgetown. The United States Embassy were housing all the CIA people, the spooks on the Caribbean. And up the river 100 Ks is Jonestown. Now there's 3 other Jonestowns. They don't call them Jonestown. Then there's 4 prison camps in the jungle that up that way. We only talk about Jonestown because they had a little incident with the Flavor Aid and the M7 bayonet. None of my stories are complete without the M7 bayonet attached to an M16 rifle. They had those at Jonestown also, because not everybody wanted to drink the Flavor Aid. Not everybody wanted to do mandates. So they had to get an injection in their shoulder. I said injection. They got a mandated injection, or they got a bayonet. So those are your choices at Jonestown. Jim Jones didn't drink the Kool-Aid. There was no Kool-Aid. He didn't drink the Flavor Aid. He didn't get bayoneted, and he didn't die. 906 innocent people died at Jonestown, approximately. There were no autopsies done, so we don't need to talk about forensics because there aren't any. They were in the jungle for over 2 weeks before they were hauled out of there, and nobody examined the bodies. So the crime scene was destroyed, okay? So supposedly it's 906 dead people who all took an oath of chastity and an oath of poverty, so they couldn't really escape. Where are you going to go? They have no money. And they're dead. Jim Jones died in a rocking chair about a week to 10 days later, shot in the back of his head, probably with a rifle. And again, there's no autopsy on Jim Jones. Now, I believe he died the day before Mayor George Moscone and Harvey Milk were murdered. Okay, now Harvey Milk's not in my story in 1969 because guess what? He is in the United States Navy. Harvey Milk is in the Navy. He's from New York. He's a Lithuanian Jewish person. And he went to the United States Navy, and he ended up bouncing around and ended up in San Diego. Remember, the site of the very first California mission from Father Junipero was San Diego. That's where Harvey Milk is. And he is receiving a less than honorable discharge from the United States Navy due to his homosexuality. Now, that is the exact story of Brian Epstein, you know, the first manager, well, the second manager of the Beatles. It was called the, what were they called before they were called the Beatles? The Quarrymen or something? I think they were called the Quarrymen. The Beatles did have a manager that booked him to Hamburg, Germany, and they left him. There was a threat of a lawsuit. But nothing came of it. It wasn't pursued. Brian Epstein, a young Jewish person from Liverpool, who was discharged from the Royal Army because he impersonated an officer in Piccadilly Circus and because of his homosexuality overtures that were made. And he was looking at going to the stockade unless he saw a psychologist. So he agrees to see a psychologist who then sends him to the RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Acting. That's where Brian Epstein went in 1954-55 with Peter Finney, with Susan York, with Judy Carne, right? Peter O'Toole, he was there. And Sarah Miles came later when she was 15. She's only 15 years old. Judy Carne was 15. So these little girls and then these 20-something men. So they're doing it RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Actors. It's like the New York Actors Studio in London. Anyway, so then Brian Epstein becomes the first official manager of the Beatles when they signed their contract with EMI RCA Victor, aka Columbia Records, CBS, because that's who's in partnership with EMI. So the same people that signed a contract with Sharon Tate signed the contract with the Beatles. And at that moment, and we can't get a straight time as to the date, we know that the Beatles auditioned on June 6, 1962. And then sometime during 1962, when Pete Best was moved aside to another band, EMI, CBS, RCA, Victor contracted the Beatles. And I believe it was a 5-year contract. Sharon Tate, earlier that same year, Sharon Tate, age 19, signed a 7-year contract with Filmways, which is just a straw company in Culver City representing MGM and CBS television. So in other words, Sharon Tate signed a 7-year deal and the Beatles signed a 5-year deal in 1962. Okay? Who do you think managed Sharon Tate's career? You think Filmways did? Or you think CBS and MGM did? Who decided her wardrobe? Who decided what films she'll do? Who decided which Beatles songs will appear on what albums? The suits upstairs. You know, the people we don't even know their names. They decide. Not Brian Epstein and not Sharon Tate's so-called manager agent. He didn't decide. He just gets paid a referral fee. All right, so that's the situation you got here. Is you got Jim Jones is 38 years old. George Moscone is 40 years old. You should know that Roman Polanski is 36 years old. Jerzy Kaczynski, Polish Jew, is 36 years old in New York, going to Columbia University. He's a graduate of Columbia University with no money. And he's introduced to Abigail Folger from San Francisco in New York at the Gotham Book Center, which is a Columbia University creation. Jerzy Kaczynski, Polish Jew, CIA, speaks French, meets Abigail Folger with Roman Polanski, same age, 36, speaks French, fluent French, lives in Paris today. And Wojtek Frykowski is injected into the story. He's 32 years old. He's a little younger. And he's the operation agent to be assigned to Abigail Folgers, not her boyfriend. He's a CIA, Jewish, Polish Jew, CIA agent. And what is Abigail Folger? Well, she's the daughter of a CIA mother with State Department clearance from her parents for El Salvador, who's in charge of Haight-Ashbury, Midnight Climax, Operation Anti-War Movement, Operation Timothy Leary, Operation Louis Jolyon West, Operation Jim Jones People's Temple. That would fall under Enos Mejia's authority. She's in charge of Sharon Tate's father, Paul James Tate, a colonel in the United States Army, and he has to report to Enos Mejia. If he wants a paycheck, he does. If he wants and guess who else is 36 years old? Diane Feinstein. Diane Feinstein. Diane Feinstein is the same age as Roman Polanski, Jerzy Kaczynski, and Wojtek. No. Roman Polanski, Jerzy Kaczynski, Diane Feinstein, and Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson's a couple months younger. He's 35. So, and he's not around. He's down in Hollywood way now. He was in San Francisco in 1967, and then he exited to go down to Malibu, Topanga Canyon, Pacific Palisades, Elvis Presley's Beverly Hills home, and then recording music at Gold Star Theater on Santa Monica in West Hollywood, and then up to Canoga Park, which is the porn capital, and then on to China Lake, CIA, Navy intelligence, weapons program at the Barker Ranch, Meyer, where they mined borax for the CIA. And he was only there like 10 days. He wasn't there long. And then they put him in the jail in Independence in Inyo County for graffiti, not homicide. Graffiti, which I think he's completely innocent of that. But it's just a little holding cell for him. That's Dianne Feinstein's peer group. Roman Polanski, Jerzy Kaczynski operating in New York, outside of Columbia University. In San Francisco, she's got Timothy Leary, who's 10 years older than her, Paul Tate, who's 10 years older than her, George Moscone, who's 4 years older than her, and she's got, let's not forget Hunter S. Thompson. He's in the story too. Now, he's younger. He's not really in Dianne Feinstein's peer group. He's working with Sonny Barger and the Hells Angels to discuss how to distribute drugs for free and make a little money on the side, right? Harvey Milk is, like I said, down in San Diego getting his less than honorable discharge. He doesn't appear into the San Francisco orbit until 1972. All right? And he's not in San Francisco for long before he gets his head blown off. So this whole idea of canonizing Harvey Milk as a leader of the gay movement in San Francisco is a complete mendacity. He was only there 4.5 years. Okay? Okay, maybe it was 5 years. Anyway, there was already a gay community established. There was also a music community, a jazz community, a dance community. There were all these communities in San Francisco, but we always pretend like we have to wait from a Jewish person from New York comes to San Francisco to validate that there's a gay movement on the Castro Street. Harvey Milk was set up, with a camera store on Castro Street, south of Market, a couple blocks south of Market, with money that I assume that he must have got from somebody. And I think that Enos Mejia was perhaps retired once her daughter got bayoneted 28 times to death. So I'm just wondering who took over Enos Mejia's private banking job after 1969. Her daughter was murdered on August 9th, 1969. This definitely put Paul Tate, into a tizzy also. But he took over Jay Sebring's, barber shop. Did you know that? He took the concept of it, the spying on your customers, and he set up a barber shop in San Pedro near where he got free housing at Rancho Palos Verdes in San Pedro, where Tiger Woods came out of. Tiger Woods came out of a CI family. Tiger Woods' father worked for Black Ops in Vietnam for CIA. And, where they spent a lot of time is Bangkok, Thailand. That's where he met his mother and got her pregnant, and then he's stationed at Los Alamitos next to Long Beach, which is next to San Pedro. And that is where Tiger Woods learned to play golf, is at Los Alamitos. It's a CIA golf course. His father worked for Army Intelligence CIA, just like Sharon Tate's father worked for Army Intelligence CIA. So Sharon Tate was an Army brat, and Tiger Woods was an Army brat. JonBenet Ramsey, she was a CIA clandestine software brat. Her father worked for Lockheed Martin. John Ramsey, software for CIA, Lockheed. Yeah. So little JonBenet Ramsey got murdered, garroted at age 6, and JonBenet Ramsey, Sharon Tate got bayoneted 16 times at age 26. 20 years. She got 20 years more life. And she never married Roman Polanski as a fake for television, fake marriage, right? You know it's fake when you have Hollywood actresses and actors attending your 2-hour cocktail party, and there is no wedding ceremony and there is no marriage license paperwork. I mean, I always say, show me the paperwork. Like the Paul Pelosi, show me the hammer, show me a description of the hammer, show me a photograph of the hammer, show me the body cam from the San Francisco police. You're not going to get that because it didn't happen. And by the way, Paul Pelosi doesn't live in that house. He lives 5 blocks to the east in a home that they were remodeling, which is probably why he has access to that stupid Broadway house with no view. That's temporary housing until they finish the remodel, where he has 4 garages for all of his Porsche Carreras that he keeps crashing. See what I'm saying, people? Don't be fooled. It's magic tricks everywhere you look. Deception and diversion. All right, so what I'm trying to tell you is Harvey Milk was CIA. And you know who else is in this story? Dan White. He's CIA also. And he was 23 years old in 1969. Abigail Folger was 25. They murdered her. All right, I'm going to go down this list real quick. Enos Mejia, Timothy Leary, Paul Tate, Sharon Tate's father, Louis Jolyon West, CIA medical doctor, psychiatrist, MK Ultra, George Moscone, Jim Jones, Bill Graham, who's a Jew from New York named Wolf Kajanka, free concerts, Jerzy Kaczynski, Diane Feinstein, Roman Polanski, Polish Jew, Charlie Manson, Tom Coomer, Jay Sebring. He opened a barbershop in San Francisco across from near the Bank of America building and where the Transamerica Pyramid was being constructed but it hadn't been completed yet. Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi, Abigail Folger. So what is that? 15, 16 people, 20 people? And then you got Harvey Milk, who rolls into town later. We have Ken Kesey. They're like 22 people. And of that list, about 16 of them were murdered, suicided, or assassinated. It's like 65 to 70% of all the people I just named were murdered at some point. Jim Jones was murdered at age 47. George Moscone murdered in his office, in the San Francisco mayor's office in City Hall, where Nancy Pelosi conducts wedding ceremonies at a murder scene for the Gordon Getty grandchild. That's kind of creepy. George Moscone murdered, assassinated at age 49. Harvey Milk murdered at age 48 in City Hall, where Nancy Pelosi presided over a wedding a year ago. Dan White was then 32 years old. Dan White's 32. And they blame it on him, right? Let me tell you a little bit about Dan White before we talk about Dianne Feinstein. You'll be amazed. So the deal on Dan White is you realize that he, I don't know if he did the murders or not. He was convicted of manslaughter of the murder of George Moscone and Harvey Milk. Because of the Twinkie defense, he ate a lot of fast foods, so the jury didn't hold him mentally responsible for the murder of George Moscone and Harvey Milk. So he was sentenced to 7 years, 8 months in prison. He served 5 years, then he was released on parole in San Francisco, and he was then murder-suicided 2 years later in the exact way that Victor Oder's eldest daughter, Tara, was murdered, which means medicated and then carbon dioxide poisoned with a garden hose in the car. And I'm going to call that he was poisoned via injection. and then they staged it to look like a suicide, but I'm going to call that a murder. And Dan White was age 39 when he went bye-bye. But he's the scapegoat for the murder of George Moscone, who's the mayor of a CIA city, and Harvey Milk, who's a CIA operative for the United States Navy. And he is a fake leader of the gay movement in San Francisco. And I mean, really fake. And, you know, when Hollywood has to do movies and get Sean Penn involved and create these mythologies, that's fake history. That's mendacity. And that's what they always do. You know, they don't have a movie about George Moscone, but they sure talk about Harvey Milk, who was only in San Francisco about 5 years. Why don't they do a movie about Harvey Milk in New York City? He spent more time in New York than he ever did in San Francisco. But anyway, that's what they do. It's called reverse engineered history. Dan White was born in Long Beach. Long Beach? I said Long Beach. It's like, if you hear me say Long Beach, that means San Pedro, that means Los Alamitos, where Tiger Woods was raised, where Sharon Tate's father worked, where Lena LaBianca was trained in the United States Army and became a sergeant in the Army during World War II. Long Beach is CIA Spooksville Port facility. Dan White was born in a CIA facility, and that was September 2nd, 1946. So it was right when the OSS changed their initials to CIA. Dan White was born in Spooksville, USA, Long Beach. He attended the Archbishop Riordan High School, except he was expelled for violence in his junior year of high school. He then went to Woodrow Wilson High School, where he graduated valedictorian of his class. So he's not stupid. Dan White was the valedictorian of his high school class. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1965. That's when the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic officially began. You'll hear a lot of nonsense about that. They didn't really put the sign up until 1967, just before the summer of peace and love, right? That's not true. Timothy Leary, Enos Mejia, Louis Jolyon West, Colonel Paul Tate were all in San Francisco, in Haight-Ashbury, in close proximity to University of San Francisco, St. Ignatius High School. They were all there in 1965. So Haight-Ashbury as a CIA operation, it was in existence when Dan White was enlisted voluntarily into the United States Army. He became a sergeant in the 101st Airborne Division and he attended the Vietnam War, 1969 to 1970, and he was honorably discharged from the United States Army in 1971. That's very different than Harvey Milk, who was other than honorably discharged from the United States Navy in San Diego. See, and that's kind of sort of like Timothy Leary, who left West Point under mysterious circumstances, but was honorably discharged as a sergeant in the Army when he was really going to be a first lieutenant or a colonel. This is where the CIA gets their key operatives, people, is the military. Absolutely, because you have a chain of command. You're used to following orders. Remember Jack Nicholson, we follow orders or people die, right? Anyway, Dan White joined the San Francisco Fire Department, and while on duty, according to the San Francisco Weekly, he rescued a woman and a baby from a 7th floor window from an apartment tower. Who cares? He was elected to be on the city council, known as the Board of Supervisors, in 1977 from District 8 of San Francisco. He immediately started to have problems with some of the board members, Harvey Milk being one of them. There were other issues besides homosexuality. That wasn't the only thing. Dan White was concerned about the drug situation in San Francisco Bay. That's a CIA operation. See, Dan White was upset with CIA operations. The Castro district, when Harvey Milk was there, had huge clandestine services involvement. So Dan White was sort of picking a fight with the CIA. When you're picking a fight with Harvey Milk and you're picking a fight with drug distribution in the city of San Francisco, you're picking a fight with the CIA. Except that look what they did. They murdered Harvey Milk, who's working for the CIA. And they murdered George Moscone, who's a CIA mayor. And then they used Dan White as the scapegoat of the CIA murders. And then they release him from prison using the Twinkie defense. But then they whack him in his garage with carbon monoxide staged death. All right, I don't want to get any. You could just go on Dan White. I want to get over to Diane Feinstein, not her real name. Let's talk about her. And where did Diane Feinstein come from? So let's figure out where she came from. Well, she came from Leon Goldman. And that's not his real name either. So Leon Goldman became a medical doctor surgeon. He did attend University of California, San Francisco. But before Leon Goldman was a doctor in San Francisco, and before he became the father of Diane Feinstein, first he was born into a Jewish family in 1904 in San Francisco. He was one of 11 children born to immigrants from Poland, so another Polish Jewish person, like Roman Polanski, like Jerzy Kaczynski, like Wojtek Frykowski, right? Those three. That's Diane Feinstein's family heritage. Same as Roman Polanski. That's where she came from Poland. Anyway, his father's real name, which is Diane Feinstein's grandfather's real name, is Samuel Galiovich. And he changed his name to Goldman, and he worked in the oil industry in the town of Taft, California. Now, I've personally been to the town of Taft, California. It's sort of, I stayed in Santa Barbara, and you can get to Taft from there. It's a hike. It's every bit of 70, 80 miles away near the Los Padres National Forest, which is another way that I gained access to Taft. Anyway, it's an oil area in an extraordinarily remote part of California. And this is where Diane Feinstein's father was raised, in Taft. Now, Taft today, they still are in the oil business, but they have a federal prison with 2,500 federal prisoners and 300 prison guard staff. So in other words, it takes about 11% of the population of your prison to manage the prison and the vendors and this is a low security prison. The reason it's low security is where you're going to go. I mean, it's 60 miles to the nearest gas station from Taft. So I mean, you'll never. The only person that can pick you up hitchhiking would be a prison guard, someone that works at the prison, because that's the only people who live in Taft is people that work at the prison or at the oil refinery office. Anyway, Diane Feinstein's father, Leon, then went to San Francisco, where he graduated from the University of Berkeley, okay, which is a CIA spook school, although it was OSS in 1926 when he graduated. Then 4 years later, he graduated with a medical degree from University of California, San Francisco, which I think we know is a bioweapons CIA spook university. And then that's the beginning of the career of Leon Goldman, who then gives birth to a daughter, 3 children, which include Diane Feinstein. And then we go to Diane Feinstein, who was born in 1933, same as Roman Polanski. Diane Feinstein was born June 22nd, 1933. That makes her 89 years old today. She's 89. And what else can I tell you? She graduated from Stanford University in 1955, and she worked for local government in San Francisco. Now, she's had 3 husbands. Okay, so let's go down that list. She had a real quickie marriage first. She married Jack Berman in 1956 and divorced him in 1959. She was 23 years old when she first married her first husband, and it didn't last. And so Jack Berman, that was a divorce in 1959. Then a couple years later, she meets Bertram Feinstein, where she has her name. They married in 1962, and then he passed away in 1978. around the time that George Moscone got assassinated by the CIA through Dan White. Then Dianne Feinstein became the mayor of San Francisco because she was the president of the Board of Supervisors. In other words, she was the chief city council person of San Francisco when George Moscone was assassinated. This sort of like if something happened to Sleepy Joe Biden, Kamala Harris of Hastings University across the street from where the assassination of George Moscone, Harvey Milk happened, right across the street is where Kamala Harris graduated with her law degree. It's where Willie Brown got his law degree too. Anyway, my point is that Dianne Feinstein was automatically made the mayor, and Kamala Harris would automatically be made the president of the United States if anything, God forbid, happened to Sleepy Joe Biden. Anyway, about 10 years went by, and Richard C. Blum and enters the picture and marries Dianne Feinstein. So we have three husbands. They're all Jewish. She's Jewish, and she retains the Feinstein name because, of course, she was mayor of San Francisco, a CI city, when she had that name in service. I think that's the point. Once you get to your highest position, and now she's supposedly a United States Senator of the United States. The problem is we don't have a democracy. We don't have a republic. So you can't really be a senator. You can be a fake senator, but you can't be a real senator because you don't represent the people of California. I'm a California native, and I'm here to tell you that Dianne Feinstein does not represent my interests, and neither does Gavin Newsom, and neither does Nancy Pelosi. So I'm not part of any democracy at all. And you know what? Mayor Jerry Brown didn't represent my interests either. And neither did Arnold the Gubernator. Wasn't he a Republican? He didn't represent my interests. He was a fake. Everybody knows that Arnold Schwarzenegger was an actor? Doesn't everybody know that Ronald Reagan was an actor and president of the Screen Actors Guild twice? Doesn't everyone know that? Don't you know that when you're a professional actor, that's what you are? You're in a cult. The Screen Actors Guild is a cult. And when you're a governor of California, you're in a cult. And Gavin Newsom is in the same friggin' cult that Arnold Schwarzenegger's in, that Ronald Reagan was in, that Dianne Feinstein is in, that Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi are in. Come on, people, wake up. They want you to... You think they're going to tell you where they live on Broadway? No way. They have multiple residences and they move around. And yeah, you can find out where they might be living if you're willing to put the time in. But I'm here to tell you that if you see it on television, that's not where they're living, okay? Thank you for listening. Please hit the like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, which is not available on the mainstream media. Thanks again. Have a great day.